Hey folks! So lately I'd been hankering a bit of frantic fun in the same vein as Dead Cells, so I decided to poke at SouthPAW Games' spine-tingling action roguelite, Skul the Hero Slayer. Discover if I had a bone to pick with this hero-hewing side-scroller, or if this hack and slash had me hoping for more. I'm your host Arlyeon, and let's find out together. The human realm and the demon lord's army. For many years these two factions have warred against each other. That is, until the armistice was reached. A brief pause in the fighting as the kingdoms came together in order to form a lasting peace. But all that changed when the human nation attacked. Only the Demon King could stop the ruthless conquerors. When the world needed him most, he was already captured. Like a chump. A few days have passed, but already the countryside has been laid to waste. The survivors bound in slavery and worse. And yet, hope isn't lost. Skul, a little bone boy, rises up to take up the mantle of hero, Slayer, and deliver the Demon Lord from the depredations of the human forces. Now, while this sums up things nicely enough, I wound up being legitimately surprised by how much I grew fond of the story, as it wasn't just a throwaway scenario. There's legitimate efforts made to craft an enjoyable plot through a variety of mediums. The NPCs you encounter and rescue have stories to share about the world, as well as certain characters within it. Plus, there's some rad scripted sequences you'll encounter when you first reach certain segments, which all come together to give a better idea of the world, your allies, and even the antagonists without being too story-dense. Or repetitive, given that you only see those scenes once unless you opt in to see them again. Frankly, for a game with a silent protagonist, I was legitimately surprised at how the game could invoke a serious degree of feels for Skul. As well as for the central antagonist, the first hero. Like, yes, the secondary antagonists feel comparatively shallow and don't linger long in the limelight. But the first hero looms large throughout the narrative, not only as a force to be conquered, but as an individual with motives. Instead of being some comical hate sink, I wound up catching a case of the sniffles during our climatic encounter, in part due to how the story unfolds, as well as the way it's integrated into the fight itself. It's legitimately good storytelling, which left me hopeful that the way the game ends is meant as a sequel or expansion hook and not one of those to be continued, never type deals. But there's more to Skul than a story, so let's mosey over to the mechanics. First off, if you're looking for something to capture a similar vibe as Dead Cells, this ain't it. Despite what the user takes say, Skul is a far cry from a Metroidvania, eschewing exploration in favor of providing players with a more combat-focused hack and slash. And this reflects in the game's level design as well, given that the crux of the game's rooms serve more as arenas, tasking with emptying them of all life before you can venture into the next. Sort of like Dungreed, really. Frankly, it's a linear enough process, save your choice of what door to enter at the end, since they determine the sort of reward you'll get when you win. Yet, this simple act of slaughter remains fairly compelling, if only because of how Skul's skill set works. Well, okay, not his exactly, since he's pretty basic, but you're not just limited to what our petite protagonist can do, since he's more than capable of just plucking up unclaimed craniums and swapping them with his own. Or between each other, given that he can carry a spare. And the game rewards you for doing so in spades, because not only is there well over 20 different skulls to acquire, they all possess distinct attacks, passive, and even abilities that activate when you swap heads. Plus, there's pools of abilities for each one, which means that even when you encounter the same head, it may still end up feeling altogether different. This is only further compounded when you take into account the rarity system. See, after every boss and mini-boss, you'll encounter a neat spider lady, who can enhance your skulls in exchange for bone parts acquired from breaking down unwanted skulls or a certain NPC. Which, by the by, is awesome, given that it enables you to take even the most basic skull and augment it into a powerhouse that can stand up to its more legendary peers. Honestly, my only nitpick with this system is sometimes difficult to predict just how drastically a skill might change when you evolve into a more powerful form, as they can shift from being physical to magical and then back again, as can their overall function. Something which made my experience with the relic system occasionally fraught. See, you can collect and carry up to 9 different relics in a given run, and all of them provide some useful passive abilities, but they all lend themselves to different strategies. Especially when you take into account the inscription subsystem, because relics also carry a pair of inscriptions, which are basically perks which can be stacked multiple times into truly devastating effects. until you accidentally turn what was a hybrid character into a pure tank or caster or some other thing and just fuck. And given that you have to balance between bouncing between bone zones for skulls and shards, relic rooms for obvious reasons, or the more boring gold rooms in order to fill your pockets for the sporadic shops, tight resources can mean the ramifications of these choices are long-lasting. Quintessences, at least, are more straightforward. Sure, they provide a solid passive boost like a relic, but instead of fussing with inscription stacking, you just have to worry about remembering to use the skills they provide. Suffice to say, though, mastering the use of all of these various components is more or less necessary in order to make progress in the game, given that the bosses are certifiable epic encounters with some decently diverse moves and multiple phases to manage. Hell, even the adventure mid-bosses you encounter get more complex as you progress, first forming hardier adventuring parties before paring things down to a decisive duel with one of them having a whole new skill set. So, don't be surprised when you wind up, well... Still, death can be a teaching moment. And by that, I mean less the wisdom of experience from when you ate shit, and more, Skul has a form of permanent progression you can learn vis-a-vis the trait tree. Helmed by a witchy friend at the home hub, and fueled by all the dark quartz enemies drop, the trait tree provides players with a useful assortment of passive skills they can learn to empower their bony bod. Plus, there's a trio that serve to further empower the different skull categories, thus making speed, balance, and power skulls far more distinct as a classification. And she's not even the only denizen you can invite to the castle either. Whilst there's a number of characters to encounter during the course of your run who can provide some neat little bonuses, a few of them will also go back to the hub to provide some lasting options like random starting skulls, relics, or even a buff that can just smooth your return to the grind and make the process of dying less punishing overall. And then there's the Dullahan, who will just happily devour heaps of your dark quartz to restore the castle. For purely cosmetic effect. It's your requisite currency dump, folks. I wish I'd known it beforehand, but there you go. Oh, and for those less inclined to dying horribly, there is a rookie mode you can opt in and out of, which helps a great deal for your overall survivability without influencing achievements. And this may have helped snag my first win against the final boss. Oh man, would you look at the time? Off to change topics before the purists end me. Now graphically, well, Skul's a really nice looking game. Whilst its style is generally cute, there's some great looking designs and animations for the enemies, and especially the bosses, which helps significantly in telegraphing where their attacks are coming from, and even when they're vulnerable. What I found especially delightful, however, was the fact that every single one of the skulls available to Skul, all of them have their own animation, which gets really neat as you begin upgrading them. Seriously, there's some stark contrast in appearance once you change something from common to legendary. And all of this love and care also extends to the audio. The overall sound effects served their purpose to me and never grew invasive, but what really sold me was the soundtrack, as I found myself happily humming along as I hounded heroes. And the boss themes are pretty damn choice too. Now, there is also voice acting, but I don't quite have as much to say, given that it's all in Korean and very specifically geared for a few specific scenes. But it didn't grate on me, so fair enough. Anyways, this brings us to our conclusion, and I have to say that as much as it was different from what I'd expected, it's been an enjoyable romp. The story, whilst not necessarily expansive, was enjoyable and had me wanting more, and the gameplay had a lot of nuance to it, especially as I grew increasingly familiar with all it had to offer. It's telling that one of my biggest regrets from playing the game was simply lacking the ability to swap between and experiment with the skulls more. The sheer diversity in their abilities and in the unique mechanics that some of them introduce allow for distinct playthroughs, and had me lamenting the lack of a training room or some other avenue where I could mess around with them more. It's just really friggin' fun. Enough so that even when I was getting annihilated by the bosses, I had no regrets. I mean, those encounters are pretty beast. And yeah, there was a lot to love visually and audio-wise. For instance, the fact that the fledgling adventurers have little level numbers under their health bars, that shit in the UI cracks me up to no end. So, it shouldn't really come as any surprise that I think Skul the Hero Slayer is a solid hit, and one I'll be dipping in and out of for quite some time. Anywho, thanks for tuning in. If you agree, disagree, or just have something to say to me, feel free to comment. And you have an interest in supporting my efforts to create new indie reviews, interviews, and gaming content, hit the subscribe button and the bell so you notice a new release. There's also a Discord, links in the description. You can become part of our community, the Crit Hit Cauldron. And that's fine, my girlfriend will probably be all like, hey, so you should also plug your Twitch. So yes, there is a Twitch over at www.twitch.tv/Arlyeon. There, I think I got it. I think we're good. Yeah. Alright, yeah, that's it. I'll catch you on the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then, folks. Bye!